Imagine you're standing in a small, dimly lit room. It's not unlike any other room you've been in. A few walls, a single window, a door locked from the outside. But there's something that makes this room different. Something that makes your heart beat just a little faster and your thoughts begin to race. The air is heavy, thick with something you can't quite name, but you feel it pressing down on your chest. You know this room well, don't you? The walls are the same walls you've always faced. The same ones you've built for yourself, brick by brick, decision by decision. There's a door in front of you, but it's locked. You are trapped. Or so you think. You've spent years in this room. You've complained, tried to break free, but every time you reach for the handle, it seems to slip just out of reach. You look out the window, and there's nothing. Just an endless expanse of space and emptiness. No direction to go, no escape route. You've become comfortable with this room, haven't you? You know its corners, the way the light shifts as the day drags on, the creaks and groans of the wooden floorboards beneath your feet. You've learned to live with it, even if the air tastes stale. The walls are your friends, your family, your anchors. And yet, there's a gnawing feeling, isn't there? The feeling that maybe, just maybe, you could have done more. That this room, this prison, was never really the problem at all. You start to question it. What if you've been holding the key all along? What if the real reason you've stayed in this room is not because you're trapped by forces beyond your control, but because you're free to leave at any time, and you don't know how to handle that freedom? This is the paradox that holds us all captive. The terrifying realization that the chains around us were never forged by others. They were forged by us. By our own choices, our own mindsets, our own refusal to face the overwhelming weight of freedom. It's easy to blame circumstances, the broken system, the people who don't understand, the unjust world that keeps you from being the person you want to be. But what if those are just excuses, distractions to keep you from facing the truth? You see, Sartre's hell isn't a place that exists beyond this life. It's a room you've been living in for years. It's the quiet, unspoken prison of your own making, locked by the freedom you fear. And this is where we face the great question. What happens when you realize that your freedom is the very thing that holds you captive? What do you do when you finally acknowledge that your life is a product of your own choices? Choices you've made to stay within the comfort of your prison, avoiding the terrifying abyss of true freedom. You stand at the threshold, holding the key in your hand. You can open the door, but you don't, because once you do, there's no turning back. And that, in itself, is terrifying. The very thought of freedom is enough to paralyze you. So now, the question remains. What if your life isn't a series of unfortunate events, or a set of circumstances beyond your control? What if, instead, the greatest challenge lies within your ability, or perhaps your inability, to embrace the terrifying gift of freedom? The door is open. Will you step through? Or will you stay inside, where the walls at least feel safe? You've stood at the edge, haven't you? The edge of freedom. And every time you've looked over it, you've turned back. Why? What is it about freedom that makes us recoil, almost as if it's a danger rather than a gift? The answer lies buried in the deepest layers of our psyche, a complex tangle of thought patterns, social conditioning, and existential dread. At first glance, freedom seems like the ideal, an open road, a canvas of limitless possibilities. But when we face the weight of it, we begin to see its darker side. This isn't just a philosophical question. It's an existential crisis that touches the very core of what it means to be human. Let's start by examining the notion of freedom itself. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the most profound thinkers to confront this paradox, argued that freedom is not merely the ability to choose, but the burden of choice itself. For Sartre, The concept of existence precedes essence was key. We are born into a world without predetermined meaning, and it is up to us to create meaning in our lives. But that means we are responsible for everything we do, for every decision, and for how we navigate the complexities of existence. And this is where the terror begins. Freedom demands total responsibility. You are not just an observer in your life. You are its architect. This terrifying realization forces us into a kind of paralysis. Because if you are the creator of your own existence, then everything you've done and everything you haven't done is a result of your own choices. It is easy to understand why, instead of taking on this responsibility, we often retreat into the comforting illusion of external forces controlling our fate. Sartre's conception of freedom leaves us no room for excuses. When you step outside the comfort of your own prison, you realize that the key was in your hands the whole time, and the walls were never as solid as you once thought. But this freedom also means that we are responsible for the consequences of every action or inaction. Take a moment to consider the psychological weight of this. When you truly understand that no one else is to blame for the path your life has taken, it's as if the very ground beneath your feet gives way. This existential responsibility is not a source of liberation. It is a heavy burden that few are willing to shoulder. In fact, Sartre believed that many people choose to live in bad faith, a state of self-deception where they deny their own freedom and responsibility. It's easier, after all, to blame society, your upbringing, or even fate for your suffering. To acknowledge your own role in creating your life is to confront the uncomfortable truth that you are, in a way, the architect of your own despair. This denial is deeply rooted in our psychology. Carl Jung described a similar phenomenon when he wrote about the shadow aspect of the self. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves we reject, the desires, fears, and traits we find too dark or uncomfortable to acknowledge. When we fail to accept the fullness of our own being, including the dark side of our desires and choices, we push these aspects into the unconscious, where they continue to shape our behavior without our awareness. Freedom for Jung is about integrating the shadow, accepting both the light and the dark parts of ourselves. The fear of freedom stems from a refusal to confront the shadow. What if, in accepting our total freedom, we also accept our darker impulses, our capacity for making choices that lead to suffering, that defy convention or morality? The idea that we could live without the constraints of social expectations, without the comforting illusions of a higher purpose or preordained destiny, terrifies us. This terror leads to a form of psychological paralysis, where we become stuck in a loop of self-doubt, regret, and inaction. Sartre's perspective on freedom, however, does not leave us without hope. For him, embracing this freedom, the full weight of it, is the path to authenticity. To live authentically is to acknowledge our freedom and our responsibility for shaping our own existence. But this requires something fundamental, a break from the norm, a rebellion against the conventions that have kept us in chains. But how do we break free when we've been conditioned for so long to avoid that very freedom? Perhaps the clearest answer comes from another philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, who explored the idea of the will to power, the inner drive to impose one's own values upon the world, rather than simply conforming to those imposed by others. Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch or Overman represents an individual who has transcended societal constraints and embraced their own capacity for self-determination. But the journey to become the Übermensch is not easy. It is a painful, tumultuous process, one that requires us to break free from all the illusions and comforts we've held onto. In this sense, Sartre and Nietzsche are not so different. Both see freedom as an act of rebellion, not against the world, but against the self. against the very mindset that refuses to accept the responsibility that comes with true freedom. But let's take a step back. Nietzsche and Sartre offer us profound insights, but their philosophies also leave us grappling with the uncomfortable truth that to live authentically requires confronting our deepest fears. We cannot look away from the fact that our choices are ours alone, nor can we escape the immense responsibility that comes with them. This is the crux of the issue. Our fear of freedom is not just an intellectual concern. It's rooted in our psychology, deeply embedded in the way we think, feel, and behave. It's not something we can easily escape because it is as much a part of us as the air we breathe. So, where do we go from here? How do we begin to wrestle with this monstrous, disorienting freedom we fear so much? How do we stop running from it and start embracing the terrifying responsibility that comes with it? This is the question we must answer. And to answer it, we must begin to unravel the unseen consequences of our actions, the consequences of living in a world where the chains are invisible, and freedom feels more like a curse than a blessing. Imagine a world where every decision you make, every choice you avoid, and every act of inaction ripples through the fabric of your existence. Now step back for a moment and ask yourself, how much of your daily life is shaped by your own freedom, your choices, or by the fear of what would happen if you fully embrace that freedom? The truth is, you may not even be fully aware of the consequences of the way you live. You may think you're simply following the rules, living day to day, making reasonable decisions based on the circumstances at hand. But beneath the surface, those reasonable choices are often governed by a hidden force, the deep fear of true freedom, which has molded you into someone who avoids facing the vast potential of your own existence. These consequences are not always immediately visible. In fact, they're often so subtle and ingrained in your everyday actions that you might not even recognize them as the results of your own fear of freedom. This fear shapes the way we think, the way we act, and the way we relate to others. It influences our relationships, our ambitions, and even our view of the world around us. And because these consequences are not obvious, they are often the hardest to see and change. Let's start with one of the most pervasive ways this fear manifests: the paralysis of choice. You've heard the saying, choice is power. It's a catchphrase we hear all the time, especially in a world where consumerism is king. Yet, in truth, choice can also feel like a heavy burden. The more options we have, the harder it becomes to make any decision at all. This isn't just a trivial observation. It's a deeply rooted phenomenon that has been studied by psychologists and philosophers alike. In his work on the paradox of choice, psychologist Barry Schwartz found that an abundance of options can lead to a sense of overwhelm and dissatisfaction. The more choices we face, the more likely we are to second-guess ourselves, to wonder if we've made the right decision, and to suffer from feelings of regret. In a world that promises freedom through choice, many of us end up stuck, paralyzed by the very thing that's supposed to liberate us. Instead of feeling empowered, we feel trapped by the sheer weight of possibilities. This paralysis isn't just about the inability to pick a product off a shelf. It permeates deeper aspects of our lives. The fear of making the wrong choice, whether it's the career path to pursue, the partner to commit to, or even the lifestyle to embrace, keeps us from stepping fully into the freedom we've been granted. We end up becoming passive observers of our own lives, choosing not to choose, out of a deep-seated fear of the consequences of freedom. There's another consequence at play here: the fear of failure and imperfection. This fear goes hand in hand with the freedom to choose. When you understand that you are responsible for the outcomes of your decisions, the specter of failure looms large. What happens if you make the wrong decision? What if you fail to live up to the potential you know is inside of you? The fear of imperfection can become so paralyzing that it stops us from acting at all. We'd rather stay in the safety of our cage than risk stepping out and falling. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that human suffering arises from our constant striving and desire for perfection, a pursuit that leads only to more dissatisfaction. The very fact that we constantly seek to avoid failure and imperfection can trap us in an endless loop of striving, without ever truly achieving or experiencing anything authentic. We are so afraid of failure that we never allow ourselves the space to grow, to err, and to learn from our mistakes. This fear of imperfection also fosters a form of self-sabotage, whether through procrastination, self-doubt, or even undermining our own efforts. The desire to protect ourselves from failure can lead us to avoid the very challenges that would help us grow. We can be so terrified of confronting our potential that we sabotage our own opportunities for growth, for freedom. But the consequences of avoiding freedom don't end with personal paralysis. They echo in the broader social structures we participate in. At a societal level, the fear of freedom and the responsibility it brings has led to an overwhelming reliance on authority and systems outside ourselves to make decisions. Think about it. When you're told what to do, you don't have to confront the consequences of your own choices. You don't have to bear the weight of responsibility, whether it's the government, your boss, your family, or societal norms. Many of us defer to external sources of power because they offer a way to escape from the discomfort of true freedom. This societal reliance on external authority can breed complacency and conformity. When people become dependent on others to define their path, they abdicate their own personal responsibility. This can create a culture of passive compliance, where people live according to the rules set by others, rather than creating their own rules based on their own values and principles. The fear of making personal choices becomes institutionalized, and with it, the collective stifling of individual potential. And what about those who try to break free? The ones who dare to question the status quo and embrace their freedom? Well, they often face another consequence: the alienation of independence. When you step into your own freedom, you risk becoming an outsider. The more you embrace your individuality and authenticity, the more likely you are to face criticism, isolation, or even rejection. Those who cling to the safety of conformity often view those who venture into freedom as threats to their own worldview. To truly embody the essence of freedom requires a courage that most people lack. It demands a willingness to stand alone, to face rejection, to be misunderstood. In this way, embracing freedom doesn't just come with personal costs. It also disrupts the very social fabric we rely on. And yet, the cost of not embracing freedom is even greater. We end up living lives of quiet desperation, silently pleading for someone else to take the responsibility off our shoulders, only to find that the very responsibility we seek to avoid is the key to our growth. These unseen consequences, personal paralysis, societal conformity, and the alienation of true freedom, are all the byproducts of the fear that haunts us. The very freedom that could set us free, if only we could embrace it fully, becomes the chains that bind us in ways we can't even begin to understand. So, what do we do with this knowledge? How do we overcome these consequences? The subtle ways in which our own fear has shaped us and the world around us. We are about to explore the rebellion, the way out, the radical shift in perspective that can free us from the invisible prison we've created for ourselves. But first, we must understand how to break the chains that have silently held us captive all this time. You've heard it before, freedom isn't free. But what if I told you that freedom, true freedom, comes with a cost far steeper than any price tag or external limitation could ever impose. The cost isn't monetary. It's not about the sacrifices you're willing to make for a cause, nor is it about the external barriers that stand between you and your desires. The real cost of freedom lies in the courage to face what Sartre calls the nausea of existence, the unbearable weight of knowing that every choice, every direction you take is yours alone. To break free, you must be willing to embrace this responsibility, the burden of creating your own meaning in a world that offers none. The rebellion, the first step toward breaking free, isn't about defeating external forces. It's about defeating the internal force that holds you back, your own fear of freedom. The moment you face this fear head-on, you begin to reclaim the power that has always been yours. Let's be clear, this isn't going to be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. So, if you're ready, let's take the first step together. Consider the lives of those who have broken free from the shackles of their own fears. People who, despite the societal pressures, the internal doubts, and the overwhelming terror of total responsibility, managed to create their own paths. One of the most iconic examples of someone who broke free from the chains of conformity was Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor. Frankl's journey to freedom wasn't through the typical means of rebellion. He didn't fight against a political system or an external enemy. No, Frankl's rebellion was an internal one, born of his decision to claim freedom within the confines of the worst imaginable circumstances, Nazi concentration camps. Frankl's philosophy, known as logotherapy, is based on the idea that the ultimate freedom is the ability to choose one's attitude, no matter what external circumstances may be. In the concentration camp, Frankl realized that while he couldn't control his physical environment, he had control over how he responded to it. Even in the face of unimaginable suffering, Frankl maintained his inner freedom by choosing to find meaning in his suffering. He found that his purpose wasn't defined by what happened to him, but by how he chose to interpret and respond to his circumstances. This realization was the key to his survival. It was his radical shift in perspective that allowed him to break free from the fear of his own mortality, of the helplessness that comes with being trapped in a situation where one has no control. His rebellion wasn't against the oppressors. It was a rebellion against his own mind, a refusal to let fear define him. Frankl's ability to embrace the freedom to choose his response, even in the direst conditions, led to his ultimate liberation, both spiritually and mentally. Frankl's story is powerful because it teaches us that freedom is not a luxury. It's a necessity for survival. And survival doesn't necessarily mean physical survival. It means surviving the crushing weight of existential despair, the feeling of being overwhelmed by a world that doesn't make sense. And when you choose to break free from the fear that binds you to your own limitations, you, too, can find a new form of liberation, one that will sustain you, no matter the external circumstances. But let's not limit this rebellion to philosophical icons. The desire to break free and create something meaningful out of chaos is embedded in human history, in the lives of those who dared to challenge the status quo. Take Frida Kahlo, the artist who defied not only physical limitations, but societal expectations. Born with a lifelong battle against illness and injury, Kahlo's body became a prison. Yet, instead of succumbing to the fear of her pain and limitations, she used it as fuel for her art. She didn't escape her suffering. She integrated it, used it to create something uniquely her own. In her work, she transformed her pain into beauty, into a statement of her personal rebellion against a world that sought to limit her. Her freedom was not in escaping the physical world. It was in her ability to choose how she would experience it and express it through her art. Kahlo's rebellion, like Frankl's, was a refusal to live in bad faith. She didn't accept the labels others placed on her. She didn't accept the boundaries set by her body, by society, or even by fate. Instead, she rebelled by embracing her limitations, by confronting them head-on, and using them to propel her into the creation of something larger than herself. Through her work, she asked a question that resonates deeply with Sartre's notion of freedom. What will you do with your existence, even when everything around you attempts to define it for you? Now, let's think about a more contemporary example, Steve Jobs. His story is often framed in the light of his business accomplishments, but his real rebellion lay in his ability to see the future not as a series of constraints, but as an open landscape waiting to be shaped. Jobs was not just a tech visionary. He was a revolutionary in the way he thought about creativity and freedom. His refusal to conform to traditional corporate structures and his relentless drive to create products that didn't just meet existing demands but created new ones were his acts of rebellion. Jobs understood that true freedom doesn't come from following the rules. It comes from breaking them and creating your own. And he did so with an almost religious fervor, one that disrupted industries, changed cultures, and redefined what was possible in the world of technology. So, what can we learn from these rebels, Franco Kahlo Jobs? They didn't seek freedom through external means. They didn't look for permission or wait for the right moment. They simply embraced the terrifying reality that they were responsible for their lives. And in doing so, they broke free from the internal chains that held them back. They became the architects of their own existence. What would happen if you did the same? The first step in this rebellion is simple, yet profoundly difficult. Acknowledge your fear. You fear freedom, and you fear the responsibility it brings. But that fear is the very thing that holds you captive. The key to breaking free is not to resist the fear, but to confront it directly, to acknowledge it, and to decide that you will not let it rule your life any longer. The second step is to take radical responsibility. Every choice, every action, and every moment of inaction has led you to where you are today. And while that may feel uncomfortable or even terrifying, it is also liberating. You are no longer a passive observer in your life. You are the creator. Once you embrace this, you stop being a prisoner to the circumstances of your life, and you begin to shape them. Finally, the rebellion requires action. It's not enough to simply acknowledge your fear and your responsibility. You must act in ways that are aligned with your authentic self. This may mean breaking away from social expectations, defying the norms that have kept you in place, or challenging yourself to do things that seem impossible. The rebellion isn't an intellectual exercise. It's a living, breathing act of creation. By rebelling against the fear that holds you captive, you step into your freedom. The chains dissolve not because the world changes, but because you've changed how you relate to it. And once you do this, you will find that the doors that once felt locked are now wide open. The prison was never real. It was always of your own making. The rebellion has begun. You stand at the threshold now, don't you? The door that once seemed like an insurmountable barrier is nothing more than a shadow, an illusion, a flimsy construct built by the very fears that have held you prisoner for so long. You've been on a journey, haven't you? A journey through the labyrinth of your own existence, encountering contradictions, self-deceptions, and hidden truths about who you are and what you're capable of. And now, with the weight of all that you've learned, you are poised to take the final step. But as you stand here, you may wonder, what comes next? What is the ultimate truth? The truth, my friend, is this. Freedom isn't something to be attained, it's something to be realized. It's not a distant goal or a final destination. It's the very essence of your being, hiding in plain sight, waiting for you to stop running from it and start living it. The moment you realize that the chains are not real, that they've never been real, you are set free not by an act of escape, but by an act of awareness. You are liberated the moment you stop seeking freedom in external things and begin to realize that it's already inside you, buried beneath the layers of fear, self-doubt, and societal conditioning. In the grandest sense, Sartre was right. We are condemned to be free. But what does that mean for us? It means that freedom is both a gift and a burden, a responsibility that we must embrace, not as a weight to be feared, but as the very thing that enables us to create, to live, and to become. But here's the paradox. The more you accept your freedom, the less you need to strive for it. The more you step into the truth of your existence, the more you realize that you have never been imprisoned at all. The walls you believed in, those suffocating walls of fear, of expectations, of unspoken rules, are nothing more than illusions, the ghosts of your own making. And as this realization settles into your soul, something begins to shift within you. You begin to see the world differently, not as a series of obstacles to be overcome, but as a vast canvas upon which you are free to paint your own masterpiece. The color is yours. The strokes are yours. The meaning is yours. No longer do you see yourself as a mere subject of fate, but as a co-creator of reality itself. Your choices are not just reactions to the world. They are active engagements with the possibilities that life offers. You are no longer bound by the fear of what could go wrong, because you understand that everything, the successes and the failures, the joy and the suffering, is part of your creation. You can make mistakes, but they are no longer the shackles they once were. They are simply experiences, the raw material for the next step in your journey. You begin to notice the world shifting, subtly and profoundly. People around you may still cling to their illusions of control, still build walls to keep their fears at bay, but you are no longer confined by the same constraints. You move through life not as a victim of circumstances, but as a sovereign, a creator. You embrace uncertainty, not with fear, but with curiosity. You understand that there is no right path. There is only the path you choose to walk. And with each step, you mold the world around you in ways that once seemed impossible. Perhaps, like those who came before you, Franco Kahlo Jobs, you will change the world. Perhaps not in the grandiose ways history remembers, but in the ways that matter most. In the quiet rebellion against the fears that have held you back, in the way you choose to live authentically, and in the way you inspire others to do the same. And in that, my friend, you will find the ultimate truth, the one that we all seek, but few of us truly understand. Freedom isn't found in escape, it is found in acceptance. When you finally accept the weight of your own responsibility, when you embrace the full spectrum of your existence, you realize that the chains were never there to begin with. The prison was always an illusion. Now you are free. And with that freedom comes the most exhilarating truth of all. The only limits that exist are the ones you place on yourself. As you step forward into your new life, let the world unfold before you, not as something to be conquered or feared, but as a space for you to explore, to create, to live. In embracing your freedom, you become the architect of a life that is entirely your own, a life not defined by fear, but by the bold, beautiful decisions you make moment by moment. So, take that final step, open the door, and know this: you have always been free.